Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
Hey, CTO Think fans. Before we fire off this latest episode, I have a few notes. We recorded this episode a couple weeks back, and our guest, Griffin Caprio, didn't have a website for his new, or a name for his new project he's working on. But we do have a link for you to check out his new startup called Dante32, which you can visit at www.dante32.com. Dante32 is a product aimed at building tools to help podcasters with distribution, analytics, and monetization, and it's aiming for a summer 2018 launch. In terms of learning more about today's topics, we do have a few resources that we have tacked on to the end of the episode that will be, so you'll hear those at the end of the show. We will put all of these details into show notes so you can follow up with everything you need to learn more about our guest and what we're talking about. So without further ado, here's our episode with guest Griffin Caprio about learning as a cultural component for your firm.
Hey, Randy. We have a guest this week. Would you like to introduce him?
Yes, we do. We are welcoming Griffin Caprio. He is a CTO / entrepreneur / networker in the Chicago area that I have known for a number of years. And let's see how I know him. He has been a CTO at Sparks Media. He was the CTO at Simple Relevance. He was head of software engineering at Innova, and he's been part of the Chicago CTO Forum, which is a networking group we mentioned a couple of weeks back. He was the founder of that. He's actually kept that going strong. It's been a tremendous group for my personal growth in technology leadership. So I wanted to welcome Griffin to the show.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Don. Hey, Randy. Big fan of the show. I've been listening to you guys since you first started, and you know, Don, I'm familiar with Randy from the Chicago community, so it's really great to see what you guys are doing here. Happy to be here.
Great.
Yeah, well, thanks.
So what are you working on right now? Just to bring up, what have you were at Innova before, you're now working on something new. Just tell us what you're up to.
Yeah, so I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart. I've started 3 companies in the past, and I have a tendency to tick-tock between starting a company and a full-time role. And so I left Innova after about 3 years in March and kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do and kind of resisted the urge to start another company for as long as I could. I traveled a little bit and took off most of April. And then, you know, the pull of a company and starting something new was too strong. And so in the beginning of May, I decided to focus on an idea that I've been working on for a little bit. It's in the podcasting space. We're basically working on tools to help distribution, analytics, and monetization for podcasters, which, you know, from what I gather, you know, talking to people like yourself, those are probably 3 of the biggest areas of need in creating a podcast as well as, you know, sustaining it and turning it into a business. So that's what I've been working on since the beginning of May. And we're going to have a couple of products in development and you know, some larger stuff ready to announce coming up here in the next few months.
Awesome. Well, in the future, when you have something that people can visit, we will post those in the show notes later on, and probably mention it, you know, on a future episode once you're able to show more to the world. So good luck with that, and we definitely could use some of the help in those exact areas that you mentioned.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
For this week, the subject that we wanted to tackle is something that you had brought up you were doing at Innova, and that is bringing in learning as a foundational cultural component to your team or company. And I taught a class last year, a classroom or a boot camp, and you visited and did a great presentation for my students. But what we're talking about here is much different in that you're trying to bring learning and knowledge into an entity that has to get work done. at the same time, and it's not just sitting in a classroom all the time. So I guess the first question is, what does learning as a foundational cultural component mean to you? And then we can talk more about execution, roadblocks, ways to do it best, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. It's it's partly the kind of core culture that you build into a team. So at Innova, we had about 150 engineers. We worked, with a team that large. There was a lot of, numbers wise turnover. We averaged, between about 10 and 15% a year, which is, hovering about industry average. The problem is that when you're a team that size, that's still 15 to 20 people a year that you're kind of having to, recruit and replace and put on the team. And so there's always kind of like a lot of change, and then there's a lot of ebbing and flowing. And so, one of the ways to kind of, build in learning as a culture for me was always the fact that things aren't going to be stable. And so we'll need an environment that allows people to kind of jump in, contribute without necessarily having a significant amount of experience under their belt, either years of experience in software engineering or years of experience in a particular code base or a particular product. And so, being in the state of kind of that constant ebb and flow and just kind of expecting it, as opposed to, kind of putting your head down and really, really, really hoping that no one leaves your team. We kind of went, I tend to go the other way, which is like, let's just assume, everybody leaves the office every night and nobody comes back the next morning. And like, what do we have to do? And kind of build your team according to that, which, at the end of the day helps, has pieces of like retention in it as well, and culture building.
So then, I guess when you approach it that way, what was the sentiment of, I don't know if it was only Innova that you did this at. Have you applied this type of approach to at other companies? Because Innova is one of the bigger firms you've worked for, based on what I remember. Did you try this at other companies as well?
Yeah, definitely. So Innova is by far the biggest, both team as well as company I've had the pleasure of working with. And I've worked with teams as small as, kind of two, me and another developer working on a project, and, probably into the 50, 60, 70 range prior to Innova. And it's really kind of the same components. So just at different scales and in different areas. And so, for example, I was the CTO of Sparks Media, and we went through a growth to scale phase where we went from kind of seed investment to Series A, and we raised institutional capital, and we had to grow and scale our team. And so the question isn't, hey, do you think we're going to have to teach stuff to people coming in? The assumption is that. Mm-hmm. And so you have to build out a culture that kind of fosters and supports that. And the ways that you do that differ with scale. For example, at Innova, I had a team dedicated to learning, onboarding, and training, with a manager of software engineering and several people in terms of coordinators and engineers that worked on the team to kind of support the overall software engineering team. Most companies can't do that because of the size, because of the scale.
Yeah.
And so the tools and tactics vary and differ. But conceptually, it's very much kind of the same underpinnings.
So let's talk about tools and tactics. What would you say are the most important, if you're trying to achieve this at your company? What are the first things that a person, a leader, should do to try to to begin this process? Because you're not going to do it overnight. It's not something that happens instantly. What do you think is at the beginning the most important thing for someone to try to install?
Yeah, definitely not going to happen overnight. As with most things that have to do with people and culture, it all starts with really two things. It starts with trust and psychological safety. And so, without those two things, you'll never have a healthy culture of questioning, because you'll never have a healthy culture where failing is acceptable. And so without those two things, you'll never have a learning culture where people can kind of build upon their knowledge and grow and mature. And so it kind of all starts with, do your people trust each other, that they can fail, that they can ask questions, that they can, appear ignorant about things or not know something or even admit that. And then do those same people have the psychological safety that they're not going to be penalized or there's not going to be a downside for those actions that I mentioned in the first part? Am I not going to get a raise next year because I tried this and failed? Or, and is nobody going to want to work with me because I asked this question and people think I'm dumb, right? So like, unless you have those two real underpinnings, everything else doesn't matter. Like you can have the best tools, the best LMS, the most amazing teachers. None of that other stuff matters. It's all about like the trust and the psychological safety.
Well, how did you achieve that? Like, what did you specifically do to get those two items kind of going? Because that to me is difficult. Like if you don't have full control or you're new to a company, those are two difficult things to achieve. So what did you do necessarily for coming into a culture that didn't have those at the beginning?
Absolutely. And it's really hard because, as a leader, you work at both ends of the spectrum where you have to immediately trust 100% your team. But then you also have to work to earn even a small percentage point of trust with them. And so, playing at both ends of the spectrum, the first and most direct way to do that is to you yourself demonstrate the qualities that you want to see shown by the other people. So that means you ask a lot of questions. You say you don't know. You point to your failures as learning opportunities. Like it all kind of like starts with your ability to show that it's not a hierarchical thing. It's not a career ladder thing. It's not you get to a certain stage and your learning stops. It's a continuous process. Some things that I've done at previous companies, just as an example, is, make my areas of improvement and learning very visible. And so in the past, at Innova, I've done things like publicize 360 reviews that I've had done about myself from peers and my boss and the people that report to me, and publish those to the team and say, these are the things I have to work on. These are the ways that I'm going to do it. And these are the ways that I'm asking you to kind of hold me accountable. Other ways are if you point out and reward people exhibiting the behavior that you're looking for in kind of like public ways. If somebody asks a question, or if you see somebody give a look on their face like I don't quite understand what was just asked, you can kind of, depending on the situation, bring up like, hey, does anybody have any questions? Or you, Randy, you look like you had a question. Or is there anything else that this makes sense to you, right? Like you can try and like engender that discussion. But I'll be honest with you, it's very, very difficult. And it's even more difficult the bigger your team gets and the more senior the people that you're working with are.
Yeah. Well, I know I started the conversation saying this is not like a classroom scenario, but what you're talking about was applicable to me in teaching, because I used to do a lot of live coding in front of my students, and the feedback I got when I started doing more JavaScript, which was more complex, people were mentioning, I really like to see you mess up, and then you don't make a big deal about it. You just kind of like, oh, I'm imperfect, and you're going to be that way too. And my students responded to the errors being made and not this like canned, everything's perfect because I practiced this before I got here type of deal. And so I totally agree with you that it's on the leadership level. The leader, the person you set the tone for the team in that space of what is really just, hey, you make mistakes, you correct them, you're not perfect, you don't know everything. And then there's that other side of, it's okay to adjust things on the fly and to not know the answer to everything. And I constantly would tell my students that too. So I've seen that in a classroom setting. It doesn't really change when you get into the business setting, I would say.
Yeah, I would say the one big difference though is when you get into the business side, um, both performance as well as people management come into play.
Oh
And
yeah.
one of the biggest ways that I've seen is culture is who gets rewarded, right? Like there's an
Yep.
expression, and so I think a lot of people have a tendency to focus on rewarding the behaviors that they want to see exhibited, but not necessarily addressing the behaviors that they don't want to see exhibited. And so, if you've got, we've all worked with people like this where they're the brilliant jerk, right?
Yeah.
You've got the one developer on the team who, wrote the original systems and knows everything about the system, but nobody can work with them. It doesn't matter what you do with everyone else on the team, as long as his or her existence is tolerated in that manner, there'll never be trust amongst the team. Like, because they'll
Yeah.
hear you say this stuff is valuable, and then they'll see it not exhibited in this other person. And they'll say, well, Griffin's saying one thing, but he's allowing this person to not do that stuff. So how can I believe what Griffin's saying?
Yeah.
And I've found that, as a last resort, one of the things that to build any sort of culture is you need to both reward and nurture what you're trying to do, as well as address and possibly remove the people that don't fit the culture that you're looking for, which can be, a delicate situation, because in technology, especially, we don't get a lot of help from the management standpoint, and we definitely don't get a lot of help on the how do I address, or how do I give negative feedback, or how do I possibly transition somebody out of the company. It's a hopefully a rarely done thing, but it's also a very, very, very important.
Sure. And then when you're brand new to a company, more often than not, the brilliant jerk is in a spot where everyone's dependent on them for production and technology and stuff. And you can't just slash and burn when you walk in the door. You have to try your best to make everyone happy, and that can be harder. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Let's say you've been able to get a culture that rewards the good behaviors and does its best to suppress the bad behaviors. What is the next step? Where do you take the knowledge, the learning from there? Because now you've gone from, hey, you have a culture that it's okay to ask questions, but it's also the answers aren't always within the team that you have. How do you start to build a culture that, or maybe bring in outsiders, that kind of thing? What's the next step, would you say, to having a, learning as a big piece of a company, continuous learning, I would say?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I would say that it's one of two things, and it kind of depends on like the size of the team that you're working with and the state of the culture. But I would say that the very first thing to do is try and identify what I call amplifiers. So people that you don't have to kind of win over with your good ideas or your direction. They're interested, they're excited, they're here to kind of work with you, and they want the learning culture too, or they want a particular change to the culture. And those are going to be some of your allies that are going to allow your message to be amplified when you're not physically in the room, so to speak.
Yeah.
The second piece, though, too, is I would really get people to focus on things and to choose things that proportionally are the things that don't change, or the things that are very core to your culture that you're trying to instill. And I'll give you an example of where learning cultures can kind of go wrong. A lot of people in technologies, when they talk about learning, I was just having this conversation the other day. they refer almost exclusively to new technologies or new frameworks. And what that's going to do, if you choose to focus exclusively and solely on that type or that archetype of knowledge as your learning culture or your learning environment, is it's going to create a sense of churn, and it's going to exhaust your people, because there's always going to be a new framework to learn, or there's always going to be a new, data analysis tool, or there'll always be a new technique to learn. And so your team is just going to get exhausted by the idea of like perpetual learning with no real progress being made that they can see. Mostly because, you get to a certain spot and it's 6 months down the road, and, that person is like really comfortable in Ember, and all of a sudden here comes Vue. And it's like, great. Everything you did previously is worthless. Here comes Vue. And it's like, that's just, even though that's a trait, I'm simplifying things, but it's an example where like that is the type of learning culture where, again, exclusively you don't want. There's a component of it, but you don't want to focus exclusively on that. You want to focus on making people better people to start with, better coworkers, and then better engineers. I think in that order.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very easy to bring up JavaScript as a good example for that, because that's what it's doing to the entire industry. I think the rapid growth, whether, for positive or negative reasons, it is the very easy area to have people latch on to the new stuff without realizing that whatever it's replacing wasn't mature either. And it's just the new buzzword. And so then you have people that are rising up in an organization for being smart simply because they know the brand new framework and not because they have actually mastered any of it in the first place.
Well, it's information arbitrage, right? It's, just because I know something that you don't, I am somehow more valuable now. And then as soon as that knowledge becomes widely known, my value goes down. And there's a lot of corporations that are built around politics that, are exclusively that, right?
Yep. So then if you have been able to, I guess, what techniques have you used at Innova or Sparks or any of the others for maybe not exemplifying the brand new stuff and actually to focus on the exact tools being used at the company? How did you navigate that? I guess what's easy for people to lean on as what's new is cool versus let's figure out how to build these things right. How did you combat that?
Well, I'll take it a step further and kind of mold your question a little bit.
Sure.
I would say that what I instead chose to do first and foremost is focus on things that don't really change over the long period of time. And an example is communication. Nobody ever willingly looks back and says, I'm done learning how to be a good communicator. I figured it all out. I'm good. I'm good there. And so you can do things like, at Innova, every single engineer that we hired got the book, Crucial Conversations, as part of a welcome package. And there was a couple of other books in there. And it was really meant to kind of do a couple of things. I don't think we got kind of as far as I wanted to before I left, but it was really meant to signify and indicate, like, look, being a good communicator is an extremely big part of being on this team. Brilliant people that cannot communicate have no place on this team. And so, bringing things like communication, bringing things like emotional intelligence and empathy and problem solving and organizational skills, those are the kind of things that almost all teams can use some improvement on and some evolution on. And those are skills that exist inside your company, outside your company, in future jobs, et cetera. And so, typically I look at a company and I look at a team and I say, well, you guys don't really need a ton of help on the tech side. You guys are all smart. Everybody's going home and hacking on their stuff for a couple hours at night or has a few open source projects. You're getting those repetitions. But what are you not getting? right? Like, what are the holes that we can look at, and how do we use that as an example to kind of do the learning? Because if you just take what people do on their spare time and bring it into their office, then all you're doing is like melding the work-life balance, and you're saying like, here's how to use GitHub better. And most people don't want that, right? Like they don't, want to hear that. Now, what's important to pull out though is that like not all teams want to become better communicators, right? Not all teams. Yes. So you have to take a stand as a leader and say, like anything, this is what we value, this is what we don't value, and then you need to amplify what you value and diminish what you don't value. And some of that would include, the fact saying like, okay, we're not good communicators right now. We're going to get better at being, at communication, or we're going to get better at collaboration or team building or anything like that. And some people are going to roll their eyes and say how much it doesn't matter and, hem and haw. But at the end of the day, those are what I used to tell people during interviews. And I interviewed, probably 400 or 500 people at Innova over 3 years. And, what I used to tell them was, look, I don't care how much Ruby you know. I don't care how much experience in financial services you have. We are primarily Ruby on Rails shop in financial services with a little bit of Go. I said, I care about your ability to learn and evolve and adapt, because the tools that we use today are not necessarily the tools that we're going to use in a year or 2 years. And I want people and I want a team that's going to come with us through that journey, and not, I'm not going to kind of throw you overboard as soon as we move on to a new tool or new technology.
And I think right there is a key learning for how do you translate this to very small companies or a startup. So you're founding a company and you're trying to bring people in. That certainly is the mindset I go in with, is we're going to be doing a lot of churning and a lot of learning. So I need somebody who can do those things. Your technical knowledge is slightly less important, because I need you to be able to adapt to and pivot to what we have. What other things do you think are vital when it comes to starting anew?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Don. And the reason that it's so valuable, and one of the things that it tends to convey, is a sense of investment in the other person. And what gets lost a lot of times when we're doing interviews for Java developers or Ruby developers or anything like that is when we focus just on the technology, the person kind of fades into the background. And so as a result, there's this kind of accepted culture of, I'm going to be gone in 2 years anyway, because that's what people in technology do. They leave and they don't really care what they're working on. As soon as something new comes out, they're off to there. But, underpinning all that is the fact that the people on both sides, you're transactional to me, right? You're nothing but an aggregation of code. And, to Don's point, if you are coming to someone and say, look, I have a startup, what you're doing today is not going to be the same thing as what you're going to be doing next week. But if you're willing, I'll invest in you and you'll invest in us, and a relationship forms that transcends, Ruby and JavaScript and any possible technology challenge that you can possibly imagine. And so, as with most things, for me, it starts really with the people, and being able to kind of like make a connection with the people themselves and show them and convey to them that like they are more than just today's code output, or,
Yeah.
Right. So we recently talked with April Winsel from Compassionate Coding, and we talked a lot about EQ skills. So I certainly, I don't want to say they've never existed, but there certainly seems to be, and this seems to have been the way I've been molding my hires as well. There seems to be a shift over the last, I don't even know how many years, from technical skills to EQ skills. emotional quotient skills. So, when do you think that shift started, or has it just been a slow graduation to the technology is less important, and just like any industry, we're getting back to the people skills being more important than the technical ability?
I think it really started when a more diverse set of people came into the industry that were previously being excluded from the industry. And so, people and collaboration communication skills, and I really resent when people call them soft skills. And so I always, I hopefully, and people can call me on this, those are skills that were never not important. We as engineers just kind of held other people in the company kind of hostage to our knowledge that we had kind of squirreled away. And so, the fact that engineering teams and development teams in the past were kind of that old boys network that were kind of the special people over to the side, the idea that that was accepted and now the world is changing is really like our point of view. The rest of the world looked at it and said, well, we tolerated you because we didn't know how to do what you could do. Yeah. And so now that more people are entering the industry and a more diverse background that know how to do what we're doing, and there's different applications of that, and software engineering and computer science and software development had become way more democratized in much, much different avenues. People are looking around and saying like, yeah, I don't have to put up with this. I don't have to put up with kind of the smug, the dismissive person. I can just go over here and find somebody else who doesn't, kind of treat me like that.
So on this side, because you're definitely going down the road for a question I've had. I feel like in my experience in the industry, I now have kind of the strength to get through this problem, but I don't know that everyone finds themselves able to. Where do you see the resistance coming when you try to introduce this to a company, whether it's a startup, whether it's a big firm? Where do you initially see the resistance? Is it top down? The top executives don't think it's necessary? Is it from the bro grammar, culture that we've seen that you're talking about is going away to some extent? Where do you see the resistance to this idea? And then how does someone overcome it if they aren't a CTO, if they're a leader, but they're not necessarily in charge just to say brilliant jerks out? What does someone do in that case?
So good question. This actually just came up recently on a panel I was speaking on. And, my response is two things. One is resistance comes from both sides, but it comes for different reasons and in different ways. And so take kind of the top executive level. The executives in any company care about results. And all things being equal, they want to minimize risk for increased results and reduce change because change brings risk, right? So if you bring them a plan with no ability to execute on it or no demonstrable results within a specified time frame, if you just say like, hey, I'm going to make the team better, but it's going to take 9 to 18 months before we see results of it, just like anything, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. Mm-hmm. Like, well, we don't have 9 to 18 months to figure that out. And so your job, I think, especially in the role that you mentioned, is how do I think and plan in the 9, 18, 24-month range, but execute every single day in small ways to kind of orientate ourselves towards that so that I can get a little bit of results, which will give me a little bit more flexible room from, my boss, which will get me a little bit more results, which will kind of just iterate on top of each other. And then at the end of the day, I used to tell people, CEOs don't care what source control you use.
Yeah.
Like nobody cares. But if you tell them instead, and this was when Subversion was coming out and we were talking about migrating from CVS and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, hey, we need to just pay some license fees for this tool or whatever.
Yeah.
The CEO was like, well, none of this makes any sense to me. But if you instead told them like, look, we're burning a developer day per week on source control issues, that turns into X amount of dollars per year. We solve that with a quarter of that for this tool. That they understand. So you have to kind of put it in terms that make them care from their incentive standpoint. I think what we tend to do is we tend to dismiss their motivations as irrelevant or not as important as my motivations. From the bottom end, I think it's definitely the programmer culture. I know it's very trendy right now to kind of like talk about your diverse and inclusive and kind of like culturally supportive team, but it's a little bit like terrible drivers. Everybody thinks it's everyone else.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, all teams, it doesn't matter how focused on this kind of stuff you are, all teams have little microaggressions and little things that happen every single day that exclude people or make people feel not normal or not part of the crowd or anything that you can possibly imagine. And so you get the old adage from all the way at the one end of, yeah, we don't care about technology, we're just hiring nice people, all the way to well, we'll hire women for project management, right? And it's stuff like that kind of like creeps into the day to day. And as with the executive facing answers, it all comes down to iteration, and it all comes down to kind of like that iterative movement. And your job as call it a mid-level leader or a mid-level manager is how can you keep the team directionally focused when you're making decisions every single day to add up to that direction.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like the end of the story, or where you're trying to get, but you just have to give your team a little bit each day so that they don't get overwhelmed. And that goes to technological changes as well as changes. You don't have to come out and make a big splash and saying, in 9 months, we're going to be completely diverse. You just kind of have to seep it in through iteration and repetition every single day. Well, like this is what we value, and the result of that is a more diverse team.
When it comes to moving, like I agree with everything that have said, especially on the fact that the cultural change is coming from the more diversity coming into the industry. The other thing that we hear a lot about that I think is not discussed, it's discussed as a matter of how people code and get things done, but it's not discussed always as about learning, is focus, time to focus. Like I've been a part of organizations where people thought that if they needed to learn something, they would say in the meeting, yeah, I know how to do that, then go home on their own time and actually knock out what they just said they knew in the meeting, because it wasn't part of a culture that actually said you were able to allocate time for finding out things, learning about things on company time. That's the time to be coding. Did you find that to be part of the culture, any of the cultures you were working in? And then what did your teams do to allow people to have time to learn on the job?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I would say it probably goes even further into you're going to get that feedback from people internal to your company, but external to your team, right? Why does the engineering team go to conferences, right? Why do they have book clubs? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? And instead of what I usually kind of bring to people is, in the case of kind of the external viewpoint, I keep everything focused on kind of like production and not raw output, because I think that's a never-ending game, right? Like n and n plus one is always going to be better. So like if you tell somebody like, hey, we got done 30 story points this week, they may ask like, well, why not 35, right? If you keep it focused instead on consistency, on meeting deliverables and meeting deadlines and meeting dates and having a cadence where you're reducing their risk, then they're going to trust you more with, okay, I don't care. I don't know what they're doing, but my stuff's getting done. And really at the end of the day, like that's all most of us care about. is, do I trust you enough that you're going to reduce my risk of this not working out?
Yep.
When it comes to, people on a team perspective, like how do I carve off time to learn? I think you need to do your best to kind of meld those into continuous activities and not discrete functions. I would highly doubt as a developer, I've been an engineer for a long time, I know you guys have been engineers for a long time. I would highly doubt that, 20 times a day, we don't look at something and say, interesting, right? Like it's kind of like you're coding something, you make a change and you're like, well, we'll recompile this and see if it works. All of that is learning. And I think it is a disservice to people when we keep activities that are focused on improvement as these like massive undertakings, because it puts so much pressure on everyone involved that it almost is destined to fail, right? There's no possible way that you'll succeed. And, this goes for, I'm sure you guys have been around the block and seen it. This goes with like large technology improvements, right? Like what's more likely to succeed, a 24-month project or, 12 two-month projects?
Sure.
Right? And so as continuous as you can make it and as iterative as you can make it, and that'll end up being your job as the leader is to stop and pause and hold the team and say, everybody gather around. Like, I want to talk about something that just happened, right? And if you carve out time and you don't make it kind of a special discrete activity, then this whole like aura of learning and the reasons for it will kind of begin to melt away, and it will just be a continuous thing. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it definitely doesn't, happen consistently with every single person. But part of the fun is trying to figure out like how people learn and how people are motivated from like a knowledge standpoint. And some people like to go and read 1,000-page books. Yeah. And some people want to talk about something for 10 minutes. And you supporting that team have to figure out like, okay, how do I create something and a culture that enables both of those people to continuously get what they need? Because if they don't, then they're just going to feel frustrated and they're going to feel stuck and they're going to feel like they don't have any challenge, and then they don't have anywhere to go.
So after 2 years, you had 2 years at Innova, almost 3 years at Innova, and
roughly 3.
Where do you think that Innova was able to do this well? Because I think Innova represents a lot of companies. I feel like the size of the company is where a lot of companies are these days that have been in the business for a number of years, and they have existing platforms. They're not just breaking new ground and disrupting something. It's like they've got technology, they've got a business, and they've got a team with a certain amount of attrition. How do you feel like Innova progressed for the time span you were there, and where do you think they are still working on to like where does a company need to go that's been down this path for that amount of time?
You mean kind of from a learning culture standpoint? So, I would say one of the things that I tried to do as the head of engineering there is kind of figure out the right level that I should play at and the right level that I should influence at and insert myself at. And one of the big things I focused on very early on is improving communication and improving transparency. People and change get a bad rap. It's not change that freaks people out. It's the unknown and the surprise and the shock that freaks people out. And so, I think one of the ways that we were able to improve the culture, especially around learning at Innova, was we significantly altered the type of communication, the frequency, the depth for everyone on the entire team. And even something simple like that. So for example, one of the things that I used to do is I would write a weekly newsletter to the entire software engineering team. And it got popular enough that we started sending it to people outside software engineering. Mm-hmm. And we did a few things like, I would write an opening paragraph, usually some sort of poorly worded joke or, some sort of pun. And then we would dive into things that the team is doing and wins. And those wins, got to the point where they were just being sent to me and I was aggregating them as opposed to kind of the one collecting them.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, it was very much like, okay, I know this team is doing this, and that's a huge accomplishment. We need to celebrate that. Like, we need to tell everybody what they just did. And we finally got to the point where, the managers and the engineers and the other people on the team would send me things to say like, hey, this person just did this, or this team just launched this.
Cool.
And then in the middle of those wins, I would put kind of funny links or interesting, text or videos or anything like that. And I would create kind of like this deliverable that you were kind of like interested in reading, when it hit your inbox. We also did a lot more speaking and a lot more kind of addressing the entire team, and a lot more kind of FaceTime individually with all the individual teams. We had a ton more stuff that I wanted to get done, and there was a lot more things that I wanted to improve upon and make an impact. But I would say that transparency and communication were the two biggest areas that we really just crushed it. Like we really, to use an overplayed word, we really improved significantly in those areas. And it was, the effect was demonstrable. The effect was demonstrable. I would say some of the areas that we really wanted to make further progress on were, we would have a onboarding and training program for the team that, we brought people through, and it taught them the basics of like Ruby on Rails, JavaScript, Go, some database stuff, some basics around analytics, things like that. I think we wanted to make a deeper and deeper stride into more ad hoc curriculum. So when I left, everyone was going through kind of like the same kit. And if you, if you knew a lot about JavaScript and not a lot about Go, but you still kind of went through the same spiel. I would have loved to have made more strides on making that a little bit more kind of like pick and choose your own adventure, and begin to include things outside of software engineering, like analytics, like financial modeling, like accounting, those kind of things that were truly valuable to the engineering team.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I guess my last question, then I'll have a question on anything I'm leaving out. But the one thing I noticed, and that was a challenge for me as a teacher in the classroom setting, was, did you find unintended resistance from the introverted side of the teams, the people that didn't want to talk about what they were doing? And I know you talked about communication as part of your job, but sometimes it's not due to arrogance. It's due to the way people, like what expends their energy, and talking to other people, getting in front of a group of people can wear them out. How did you handle that part of the personalities and the different makeup of that almost every team has?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Randy. Not everybody communicates and likes to communicate in the same way, in the same vein that not everybody likes to be recognized in the same way. Yeah. I think it really comes down to getting to know your team and getting to know the individual motivations and the individual incentives that kind of push your team, that they like and dislike, down to an individual level. And so, I definitely had people that all they wanted from a recognition standpoint is a handwritten note.
Yeah. Like
just a thank you. Other people wanted to be brought up in front of, the entire software engineering team and lauded for their accomplishments. And if you switch those two people with those two recognition types, you'll have a mess on your hands. And so getting as close to your team as you can to try and figure out, what motivates you? How do you like to be recognized? How do you prefer feedback? Do you like it in person? Do you like it over email? I managed people in the past that when I had negative feedback, they wanted it in person immediately after it happened.
Yeah.
I had other people that when I had negative feedback, they wanted it in email so that they could process it, think about it themselves, and then we can have a discussion in person, a day or two after they had kind of like processed it.
Yeah.
But if you tried to do the same with if you tried to flip that, you'd end up in kind of a very problematic situation with the person that doesn't like to respond in real time. and you'd end up in a very frustrating situation with the person that wanted the real-time feedback.
Yep.
And so definitely don't force, people or situations on kind of like a one-size-fits-all manner.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. And I think that when you try to apply, and anybody tries to treat everyone the same, which is different than treating people equally, it's treating people the same, different personalities is not how it works. You have to know everyone on your team and treat them equally but differently in the sense of how they respond to praise, stimuli, feedback, any of that.
I will say the one that the learning from my career that really brought this forward, as far as figuring out each person and how to manage, was during the time at IBM, where I was managing offshore resources a lot. And I had some resources from India. I had some resources from the Philippines. And it was a matter, we're talking about managing people as individuals, which you must do. But then when you're working with a group of people from a country, you have to manage them as individuals. You also have to understand their culture and what motivates them and what's important to them and how they react to certain things. So I'm trying to phrase this properly to where I'm not saying you treat everyone from that culture the same. You have to do that learning to figure out what those different things are. And then you break it down even further to the individual level. And that's where it became real apparent that, I've got to manage each person based on them and not just what I think is best for everyone.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Don. The context always matters. One of the things that I've learned in my career is, I'm a 6'2", shaved head, kind of buzz cut, dark haired, kind of tattooed guy. I can be talking to people and give off a very aggressive or animated, and I'm Italian too, so I like move my hands and everything like that. I could give off a very aggressive and animated body language conveyance to the person that I'm talking to that may not be nearly as urgent or serious or angry as it may be perceived. And so, working with people from different cultures that are, maybe more demure or maybe more excited or more animated, like understanding like how you're perceived in any light, in any context is really, really important. And it's a good way, when I talked about communication earlier, it's verbal as well as nonverbal.
Yeah. So is there, this is some great lessons for people to take away. I think this is a very important track for people in our business and our line of work that are wanting to be a leader or are a leader and trying to figure out what it takes to run a stable, more, like a stronger organization with a diverse type of people put together working on what is usually technology that and in some ways has no soul. But I guess, is there anything that we haven't brought up that you're like, this is still an important piece that we haven't talked about yet? I can't think of anything, but I just want to know if there's a last parting thing that you have to say about this subject.
Yeah. So the only thing that I'd say is, and if your audience and people listening take away one thing, it's like most things in our lives, starting small and building a consistency and a habit will pay off in dividends. And so if you're at home or you're at your work and you're trying to think of like, how am I going to start? Like, how am I going to do this? It's this insurmountable feat in front of you. And you're like, well, how am I going to eat the elephant? And the old joke is one bite at a time. Mm-hmm. That's really what changing behavior and changing psychology is because, a learning culture, just like any other kind of cultural transformations, whether it's agile or lean or process or technology or development, whatever it is, at the end of the day, you're asking people to change their behavior, and that does not happen overnight, and nor does it happen without against their will. And so, starting small, building people up, and getting their support and getting their kind of buy-in, even if it means, you don't make the progress that you want to make, right? Everyone has an end state, but it's more about the journey than kind of the end state. And that's more important for actually making change.
Awesome. So in the future, how do people find you? If, like, in the sense of, you have been an advisor for a number of companies, you're working, like you said, you're working on your own project right now. How do people find you if they have questions or want to follow up on what you're doing?
Yeah, so I would say the easiest is either Twitter or email. I respond to pretty much everything that I get in my inbox, or any tweets or DMs that I get on Twitter. As you mentioned, I'm kind of heads down right now on a new venture, but I give all the emails that I received a thoughtful response. Yeah. Mostly because most people don't email, and so the ones that do, I really want to kind of respond and offer to help. I'm always available, especially if you're in Chicago, to meet up for coffee sometime, or grab lunch if you just want to talk about any of the things that we talked about, or career or anything like that. I make it a point to really give back from a community standpoint, because others make it a point to give to me, and so. Yep. I really want to kind of like pay it forward and allow that kind of like continual learning to happen, because frankly, I want to keep my good karma coming my way too. So.
Well, this has been a great episode. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your insight. When Don and I talk about why we do the podcast, it's this type of show that really gets down to what is going to make this industry better? What's going to make better managers and leaders? So again, thank you for coming on, because this is exactly the message we want to send out to people.
Yeah, absolutely. This was great. I appreciate you having me. And
for sure.
If you want, we can put some links to some books or some resources or some TED Talks that kind of reinforce or expand on the messages and the things that we've been talking about. But it's always great talking about this kind of stuff, and the work, like I said at the beginning of the show, the work that you two are doing to kind of spread the word and spread the message, I think is incredibly valuable, and I'm really appreciative.
Awesome. Well, also let us know about the new venture when it gets out, and we will be sure to tell people where to go once you are ready to show it.
Absolutely. I would appreciate that. That'd be
yeah, and hopefully we'll start using it ourselves.
Exactly. All right. Well, we will call it a day.
We'll tell people how well it works.
Exactly. All right. So we will talk next week. Thanks, Griffin.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Griffin.
As promised, here are a few resources you can check out that Griffin recommends for folks wanting to learn more about learning as a cultural component of your company. We'll also add these links to the show notes so you can learn more about what we consider a pretty important topic. First, there's a TED Talk with Breen Brown about vulnerability and empathy. Second, there's 2 episodes of the Reboot podcast, one entitled The Space Between Stimulus and Response with Nicole Glaros and Jerry Colonna. And then there's a second episode of the Reboot podcast entitled When Did You Start to Listen to Your Heart with Brad Feld and Jerry Colonna. There are 2 books, a book called Crucial Conversation Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High by Carrie Patterson and multiple other authors, and a book called The Art of Possibility, Transforming Professional and Personal Life by Rosamund and Ben Zander. Again, all of these links will be in the show notes. These are books and resources that Griffin found really useful for himself when he was learning more about everything we talked about today. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by PremiumBeat.com. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.